I stood at the end of the driveway, my pulse hammering like mortar fire in my ears. The house hadn't changed in 3 years. Its peeling blue siding, the porch swing creaking in the evening breeze, the mailbox tilted with Lila's careful, cursive spelling out carver. But I was a stranger to myself, hollowed out by the Afghan desert, where blood and dust had carved away the man my family once knew. Disguised in a thrift store jacket, a scruffy beard, and a cap shadowing my eyes, I wondered if I was still their husband, their father, or just a ghost they'd stopped waiting for. I'd planned this moment for months, dreaming of surprising Lila and our kids, Emma and Jack, with a homecoming to stitch together what the war had ripped apart. Emma's laugh, sharp and bright like wind chimes, haunted me through every sleepless night. Jack's crooked grin, the one he'd flash when I'd toss him over my shoulder, was the only thing that kept me sane. But now, standing here, the glow of the living room lights felt like a barrier. A stranger's pickup truck sat in the drive, its unfamiliarity twisting my gut. What if my letters, poured out in foxholes stained with sweat, never reached them? What if they'd built a life without me, one I no longer fit into? The air carried the faint scent of Lila's lavender candles, and it hit me like a punch, dragging me back to nights we'd spent on that porch, her head on my shoulder. There's a peculiar ache in standing outside your own life, unsure if you're still welcome. As I took my first step toward the door, gravel crunching under my boots, a shadow moved behind the curtain, a figure I didn't recognize. My hand froze on the gate. Whatever waited inside, I wasn't sure I was ready to face it. I stood at the end of the driveway, my hand locked on the gate, its cold iron biting into my palm like a warning I couldn't heed. A November wind sliced through my thrift store jacket, carrying the sharp tang of frost and the faint rot of fallen leaves. The house loomed against the bruised dusk, its peeling blue siding and creaking porch swing swaying like a ghost's restless breath. A shadow flickered behind the living room curtain, quick, deliberate, then vanished, leaving my pulse hammering like mortar fire in my ears. I was home, but the word felt like a lie, heavy and foreign on my tongue. Each step forward crunched gravel under my boots, the sound a traitor to the disguise I'd cobbled together. A scruffy beard, a cap pulled low, clothes that smelled of someone else's life. I caught my reflection in the stranger's pickup truck parked in the drive. Gaunt cheeks, eyes hollowed out by 3 years in Afghanistan's dust and blood. This wasn't the man Lila had married, the one who'd promised her forever under a starlit sky. That man was gone, buried somewhere in the desert with the parts of me I couldn't claw back. Emma's giggle pierced the night, sharp and bright, yanking me back to her 5th birthday. Chocolate cake smeared on her cheeks, her tiny hand in mine. The memory burned, a flare in the dark, and I fumbled for the photo in my pocket. Lila, Emma, and Jack at the county fair, their smiles frozen in a time I hadn't touched. My fingers, rough and unsteady, traced their faces, as if I could summon them back to me. But the house felt like a fortress now, its warm glow a barrier I didn't know how to cross. The front door creaked open, and a man's voice, low, unfamiliar, edged with suspicion, cut through the quiet. "Lila, who's out there?" My breath caught, shallow and ragged, and I ducked behind the truck, the cold metal pressing against my back. My heart raced, a trapped thing, as I tried to make sense of him. Who was he, standing in my doorway, speaking my wife's name with such ease? The photo slipped from my trembling fingers, fluttering to the dirt, and I didn't dare move to retrieve it. The wind picked up, rattling the swing, and I crouched lower, my mind spiraling. I'd planned this for months, dreaming of surprising Lila and the kids, of stitching together what the war had torn apart. But now, with that stranger's voice echoing, doubt clawed at me. What if they'd moved on? What if the letters I'd sent, scrawled in bunkers, stained with sweat, never reached them? What if the life I'd left behind had grown over my absence, like vines over a forgotten grave? I stared at the house, its light spilling onto the lawn, and felt the weight of my disguise. Not just the clothes, but the lie I'd told myself that I could come back unchanged. The gate stood between us, a line I wasn't sure I could cross. Was I too late to reclaim my place? Or had I never really left? The question hung in the air, unanswered, as the shadow moved again behind the curtain, watching me from the life I'd lost. Crouched behind the stranger's pickup, I felt like a thief, skulking through my own life. The November chill seeping into my bones. The man's voice, gruff, proprietary, still hung in the air, twisting the knife of doubt deeper into my chest. The house stood defiant, its warm light spilling onto the frost-dusted lawn, and the faint scent of Lila's lavender candles mingled with the truck's acrid motor oil, grounding me in a world that felt like a dream gone sour. I pressed my back against the cold metal, my breath shallow, and let memory flood in. Jack's tiny hands clutching my dog tags in 22, his voice cracking as he begged me not to go. "Don't leave, Dad," he'd whispered, and I'd promised I'd come back. But the man I'd been, whole, hopeful, hadn't survived Afghanistan's relentless grind. The war had carved me hollow, left me with nightmares that clung like damp rot. I tugged my cap lower, the disguise a fragile shield against the shame of what I'd become. The man stepped onto the porch, his silhouette broad and confident, filling the doorway like he owned it. My fingers tightened into fists, nails biting into my palms. Who was he, standing where I should have been, his ease a silent theft of my place? I wanted to storm the porch, to demand answers, but fear rooted me. Fear that Lila had found someone better, someone who hadn't broken her heart by leaving. The thought was a blade, sharp and unrelenting. A light flared upstairs. Emma's room, its soft glow a beacon in the dark. I pictured her there, curled up with the letters I'd sent. If they'd ever arrived, had she kept them under her pillow like she used to with my old t-shirts? Or had she forgotten me, her father reduced to a fading story? The question burned, and I shifted, the gravel crunching under my boots, a sound too loud in the quiet. I froze, heart pounding, but the man didn't turn. The night pressed close, heavy with questions I couldn't answer. Why did my home feel like a battlefield, every corner laced with traps? I traced the outline of another letter in my jacket, its edges worn from months of carrying it like a talisman. "Lila, I'm still yours," I'd written, but the words felt like a lie now, mocked by the stranger's presence. Had she waited? Or had the silence of my lost letters convinced her I was gone for good? I glanced at the photo in the dirt, its edges curling in the frost. Picking it up would mean stepping into the open, risking everything. I stayed hidden, my breath fogging the air, and let the weight of my absence settle over me. The porch swing creaked, a lonely sound, and I wondered if Lila still sat there, waiting for a man who no longer existed. The man on the porch scanned the dark, his gaze passing over me, and I felt invisible, not just to him, but to the life I'd left behind. The house stood silent, its secrets locked tight, and I knew I couldn't stay hidden forever. But moving forward meant facing the truth of what I'd lost, and I wasn't sure I had the strength. The night stretched on, a battlefield of my own making, and I waited, a thief in the dark, for a sign that I still belonged. The porch steps groaned under my boots, each creak a warning from the house itself. You don't belong here anymore. The November air bit at my knuckles, my breath fogging like a ghost's sigh, and my heart thrashed like a caged bird. I edged closer to the living room window, the glow within a cruel promise of warmth I couldn't touch. Lila stood framed in the light, her hair cropped shorter than I remembered, her face etched with a weariness that carved a hole in my chest. She laughed at something the stranger said, but it was a brittle sound, like glass teetering on the edge of a fall. I dreamed of that laugh for 3 years, through nights of sand and gunfire, but now it felt barbed, laced with a betrayal I couldn't name. My palm pressed against the window, the glass icy under my skin, as if I could reach through time to the nights we'd spent on this porch. Her head on my shoulder, the world soft and sure. Jack appeared, taller now, his frame lanky with the awkwardness of a boy turning man. He tossed a soccer ball, his movements sharp, his eyes dark with a defiance I didn't know. The stranger caught the ball, their ease a silent erasure of my place. My throat tightened, and I leaned closer, the cold glass fogging under my breath. They moved like a family, a unit I was outside of, and the weight of that truth pressed harder than any rucksack I'd carried. I shifted, and my boot caught a loose board, the sound cracking through the night like a gunshot. Lila's head snapped toward the window, her eyes narrowing as they searched the dark. I froze, my pulse a roar, certain she'd seen me, the bearded stranger lurking outside her life. But her gaze passed over me, unseeing, and I wondered if I was already invisible to her, a ghost she'd stopped looking for. The thought was a blade twisting deep. I sank back, the porch's shadow swallowing me, and let the question claw at me. What does it mean to return when the life you left has moved on without you? The house stood silent, its light spilling onto the frosted lawn, and I saw my reflection in the window. Not the soldier Lila had loved, but a hollowed-out man, disguised not just by clothes, but by the years I couldn't reclaim. The stranger said something, and Lila's face softened, her hand brushing Jack's hair. The gesture was so familiar, so hers, that it stole my breath. I wanted to shatter the glass, to scream my name, to demand my place back. But fear held me. Fear that she'd look at me and see only the war I'd brought home, the nightmares that woke me gasping. The wind rattled the swing, a lonely creak, and I stayed hidden, my hands still tingling from the glass. The night stretched on, and I knew I couldn't linger forever. But stepping into that light, meant facing the truth of what I'd become, and I wasn't sure I could bear it. Lila turned away, her silhouette fading, and I stood alone, the window's truth a mirror I couldn't escape. The house held its secrets, and I was one of them. Waiting in the dark for a courage I didn't have, I slipped into the backyard, my pulse a relentless drumbeat in my throat, the November frost crunching under my boots. The disguise wasn't just the thrift store jacket or the scruffy beard. It was the lie I'd told myself that I could step back into their world unchanged, as if 3 years of war hadn't carved me into something jagged and unfamiliar. The house loomed behind me, its warm light a taunt, and the air carried the faint sting of wood smoke, grounding me in a life I no longer fit. The old oak tree stood sentinel, its branches heavy with the tire swings Jack used to beg me to push, his laughter ringing through summers I'd lost. I touched the rope, frayed and weathered, and saw him there, 5 years old, fearless, shouting, "Higher, Dad!" The memory was a blade slicing through the fog of my absence. I moved on, my boots sinking into the damp grass, and found Emma's bike by the shed, its handlebars tangled with weeds, rusted like the years I'd missed. A dog's bark, sharp, new, erupted from inside, another stranger in the life I didn't know. I froze, my breath fogging, and edged toward the kitchen window. Lila stood at the sink, scrubbing dishes with slow, mechanical motions. Her shoulders slumped under a weight I couldn't see. Her face was pale, her eyes distant, and I wondered what ghosts haunted her, mine or her own. The sight of her, so close yet unreachable, was a fist to my gut. I sank against the shed, the wood rough against my back, and something crunched under my boot. A crumpled letter, my handwriting jagged across the envelope. "Lila, I'll be home soon." It was unopened, its edges curled with damp, abandoned like a promise no one believed. My fingers trembled as I held it, the words inside a lifeline that had never reached her. Had they stopped waiting because my letters stopped coming, lost in the military's chaos? The thought was a stone in my chest, heavy and cold. The stranger appeared in the kitchen, his hand brushing Lila's shoulder, and my fists clenched, nails biting into my palms. I wanted to break through the door, to tear him away, to claim what was mine, but the letter in my hand held me back, a reminder of how much I'd failed them. The dog barked again, louder, and I retreated deeper into the shadows, my pulse racing. The backyard was a graveyard of relics. Our swing, Emma's bike, my letter, each one proof of the life I'd left behind. The night pressed in, and I leaned against the shed. The letter clutched tight. Lila's silhouette faded as she turned off the kitchen light, leaving me in darkness. I couldn't stay hidden forever, but stepping forward meant facing the truth of what I'd become. A man who'd survived the war but lost his home. The oak tree creaked in the wind, a mournful sound, and I wondered if Lila still sat under it, waiting for a man who no longer existed. The letter burned in my hand, a question I couldn't answer. Had I lost them because I'd stopped fighting? Or because I'd never stopped? The backyard held its secrets, and I was one of them, a relic of a life I couldn't reclaim. I sank against the shed, The November air burning my lungs, the unopened letter in my hand a weight heavier than any rucksack. My letters, dozens scrawled in Afghan bunkers, my only tether to home, had never reached them, lost in the military's maze. The backyard was a frozen tableau, the oak tree's branches clawing at the starlit sky, and the house stood silent, its light a cruel reminder of the life I'd failed to reclaim. My disguise felt like a second skin, tight and suffocating, hiding a man I barely recognized. I pulled another letter from my jacket, its ink smudged from months of carrying it like a prayer. Lila, I am still yours. Wait for me. The words mocked me now, empty in the face of the stranger's truck, the dog's bark, the life that had grown without me. My fingers traced the paper, worn thin, and I wondered if Lila had ever stopped waiting, or if my silence had buried me long before I came home. The thought was a splinter lodged deep. The back door creaked open, and Emma stepped out, her silhouette taller than I remembered, stealing my breath. She was no longer the child I had left, her face pale under the starlight, her eyes carrying a weight I didn't know. She sat on the porch steps, lighting a lavender candle, its flicker casting shadows that danced like ghosts. "Dad, where are you?" she whispered, her voice soft but piercing, a blade to my chest. I gripped the shed, my knees buckling, desperate to call out, to tell her I was here. But the stranger's truck loomed in the drive, its presence a chain holding me back. What if I stepped forward and saw only pity in her eyes, or worse, indifference? The war had taken my courage, left me with nightmares that woke me gasping, and I couldn't bear to see them look at me as a stranger. Emma's candle burned low, its scent mingling with the frost, and I stayed hidden, my breath fogging the air, a coward in my own backyard. Her whisper lingered, a question I couldn't answer. Was she still mine, or had I become a name she mourned? The house stood silent, its secrets locked tight, and I saw my reflection in the shed's window. Not the father Emma needed, but a man broken by the desert, disguised by shame. The letter in my hand was a lifeline that had snapped, and I wondered if I'd ever been more than a ghost to them, even before I left. The night stretched on, and Emma blew out the candle, her silhouette fading as she slipped inside. The door clicked shut, a sound final as a gunshot, and I leaned against the shed, the letter crumpling in my fist. I couldn't stay hidden forever, but stepping into her world meant facing the truth of what I'd lost. The stars above were cold, unyielding, and I felt the weight of my absence settle over me. How do you reclaim a family when they think you're gone forever? The question burned, unanswered, as the backyard held its breath. The oak tree creaked, a mournful echo, and I stood alone, a shadow among shadows, waiting for a courage I didn't have. The night was a battlefield, and I was losing ground. Dawn broke cold and gray, and I watched from a park bench across the street as the stranger climbed into his pickup, his face clear now, weathered, kind-eyed, not the villain I'd painted in the dark. The November air stung my face, the frost glittering on the grass, and the house stood quiet, its peeling blue siding a faded memory of the life I'd left. My disguise felt heavier now, the beard and jacket a lie I couldn't shed, and the letter in my pocket burned like a coal. Lila waved him off from the porch, her smile tight, like she was holding herself together for someone else's sake. Her eyes lingered on the truck as it pulled away, and I wondered what weight she carried, mine or her own. I followed him, my boots heavy on the sidewalk, drawn by a need to know who he was. This man who'd stepped into my place. The town was waking, its streets familiar yet foreign, and I kept my cap low, a shadow trailing a ghost. At the hardware store, he greeted locals with a laugh, his ease a stark contrast to the knot in my chest. His name was Tom, I overheard, a widower who'd lost his wife and daughter, a man who'd found solace in helping Lila. The words landed like a punch, guilt and anger twisting together. I'd wanted Lila to have help, to not face the years alone, but seeing him here, so rooted in my town, was a theft I couldn't forgive. I leaned against a lamppost, my breath fogging, and let the truth settle. Tom wasn't my enemy, but he was a mirror, reflecting the life I'd failed to live. His kindness was a blade, cutting deeper than any jealousy. Had he sat with Jack through nightmares, helped Emma with homework, held Lila when she cried? The thought was a stone in my throat, and I turned away, the store's bell jingling as he left. Back at the house, I saw Jack in the yard, kicking a soccer ball alone, his face shadowed with a loneliness I knew too well. He was taller now, his movements sharp with a defiance that hadn't been there before. I wanted to call out, to tell him I was here, but the letter in my pocket, "Lila, I'm still yours," held me back. What right did I have to disrupt his world when Tom had been the one to stay? The park bench creaked under me, and I watched the house, its light dim in the morning haze. Tom's truck was gone, but his presence lingered, a question I couldn't escape. Had I lost them because I'd left? Or because I'd come back too late? The letter burned in my hand, its words a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. Jack's ball rolled into the street, and he chased it, his face a mirror of my own isolation. The town moved around me, oblivious, and I sat frozen, a stranger in my own life. The house stood silent, its secrets locked tight, and I knew I couldn't hide forever. But facing Tom's truth meant facing my own, and I wasn't ready. The November wind carried the scent of frost, and I waited, a man without a place, for a sign I still belonged. I couldn't wait another day. That night, I stood on the porch, my knuckles rapping the door, the sound sharp in the November quiet. My disguise, thrift store jacket, scruffy beard, cap low, was intact, but my voice trembled as I asked Lila for directions to the highway. The lie tasted bitter, a shield against the truth I wasn't ready to face. The house glowed behind her, its light spilling onto the frost-dusted steps, and the air carried the faint warmth of lavender, a ghost of our old life. Lila's eyes locked on mine, and for a heartbeat, I swore she saw through the beard, the cap, the years of war that had carved me hollow. "Come in," she said, her voice soft, but her hands trembling as she gestured me inside. The living room was achingly familiar. Same worn couch, same photos on the mantel, but it felt like a stage, a place I no longer belonged. I stood stiff, my boots tracking dirt, a stranger in my own home. Jack watched from the couch, his gaze sharp, like he could smell the deception. He was taller now, his eyes dark with a defiance that cut me deep. I wanted to reach for him, to tell him I was here, but the lie held me back, a chain I'd forged myself. Lila poured me water, her movements careful, and I clutched the glass, my fingers unsteady. The silence was heavy, broken only by the creak of the floorboards. Emma appeared in the doorway, clutching my old copy of Huck Finn, its pages dog-eared from nights I'd read to her. Her eyes, Lila's eyes, studied me, and I nearly called her M, the word catching in my throat. "You look familiar," Lila said, her brow creasing, and I froze, the glass cold against my palm. Suspicion flickered in her gaze, and I mumbled something about the highway, my voice a stranger's, too rough, too wrong. I fled to the porch, the night air biting my face, my disguise cracking under the weight of her stare. The door clicked shut behind me, and I leaned against the railing, my breath fogging. I'd come so close to breaking, to tearing off the cap and telling her everything. But fear held me, fear that she'd see the war in my eyes, the nightmares that woke me gasping, the man who'd failed her. The swing creaked in the wind, a lonely sound, and I saw her face again, searching mine. The letter in my pocket, "Lila, I'm still yours," burned, a reminder of the promises I'd broken. Jack's gaze lingered in my mind, his suspicion a mirror of my own doubts. Had he seen me, the father he'd lost, or just a liar passing through? The house stood silent, its light dim, and I knew I couldn't keep this up. But stepping into the truth meant bearing the scars I'd hidden, and I wasn't sure I could survive her judgment. The frost glittered on the lawn, and I stood frozen, a man caught between worlds. Lila's voice echoed in my head, soft and searching, and I wondered if she'd felt me, the ghost of her husband, in that fleeting moment. The night was a battlefield, and I was losing, a liar on my own porch, waiting for a courage I didn't have. I returned the next day, drawn back like a moth to a flame, the November sun, pale and cold. I stood on the porch, my disguise fraying, and told Lila I was a veteran passing through, asking about her life. The lie was a thin veil, my voice rough with the weight of 3 years' silence. The house smelled of lavender and coffee, a cruel echo of mornings we'd shared, and its light felt like a spotlight, exposing the man I had failed to be. Lila sat across from me, her eyes raw with a grief she didn't name. She spoke of her husband, me, with a love that broke me, saying his letters stopped in 23, leaving her to believe he was gone. "He was my anchor," she said, her voice cracking, and I gripped the table, my knuckles white. The military had lost my letters, severed my lifeline, and I wanted to scream the truth, to tell her I was here. But the words stuck, choked by shame. Emma doodled in a notebook at the table, her pencil scratching stars and soldiers, her eyes wide as she asked, "Did you know a soldier named Carver?" My throat tightened, and I lied, my voice a stranger's, saying I hadn't. Her hope dimmed, and I hated myself for it. For every moment I'd let them mourn me. Jack leaned against the wall, his gaze burning, his voice low. You talk like him. You move like him. His words were a blade cutting through my disguise. At dinner, Lila set a plate of meatloaf, my favorite, and I froze. The familiar smell, a quiet accusation. I took a bite, the taste dragging me back to Sunday nights. Jack on my lap, Emma giggling. Lila's gaze lingered, searching, and I felt the truth clawing its way out. You eat like him, she said softly, and I nearly dropped my fork, my hand shaking. The room was a battlefield, every glance of mine I couldn't dodge. Jack's eyes never left me, his defiance a mirror of my own guilt. Emma's doodles lay open, a soldier under stars, labeled Daddy, and I wanted to reach for her, to tell her I was home, but the lie held me, a chain forged in the desert, and I sat silent, a stranger at my own table. Lila cleared the plates, her movement slow, and I saw the weight she carried, my absence, her grief, a life rebuilt on ruins. I excused myself, fleeing to the porch, the night air sharp in my lungs. Jack followed, his voice sharp. You're hiding something. I wanted to tear off the cap, to tell him everything, but fear held me. Fear that they'd see the war in me, the man who'd failed them. The letter in my pocket, Lila, I'm still yours, was a lie I couldn't keep. The house stood silent, its light dim, and I knew the truth was unraveling, thread by thread. The frost glittered under the stars, and I leaned against the railing, Lila's words echoing. You eat like him. Had she seen me, or was I just a ghost she wanted to believe in? The night was a battlefield, and I was losing ground, a man on the edge of his own life, waiting for the courage to step into the light. I returned the next day, drawn back like a moth to a flame, the November sun pale and cold. I stood on the porch, my disguise fraying, and told Lila I was a veteran passing through, asking about her life. The lie was a thin veil, my voice rough with the weight of 3 years' silence. The house smelled of lavender and coffee, a cruel echo of mornings we'd shared, and its light felt like a spotlight, exposing the man I'd failed to be. Lila sat across from me, her eyes raw with a grief she didn't name. She spoke of her husband, me, with a love that broke me, saying his letters stopped in 23, leaving her to believe he was gone. He was my anchor, she said, her voice cracking, and I gripped the table, my knuckles white. The military had lost my letters, severed my lifeline, and I wanted to scream the truth, to tell her I was here, but the words stuck, choked by shame. Emma doodled in a notebook at the table, her pencil scratching stars and soldiers, her eyes wide as she asked, "Did you know a soldier named Carver?" My throat tightened, and I lied, my voice a stranger's, saying I hadn't. Her hope dimmed, and I hated myself for it. For every moment I'd let them mourn me. Jack leaned against the wall, his gaze burning, his voice low. You talk like him. You move like him. His words were a blade cutting through my disguise. At dinner, Lila set a plate of meatloaf, my favorite, and I froze. The familiar smell, a quiet accusation. I took a bite, the taste dragging me back to Sunday nights, Jack on my lap, Emma giggling. Lila's gaze lingered, searching, and I felt the truth clawing its way out. You eat like him, she said softly, and I nearly dropped my fork, my hand shaking. The room was a battlefield, Every glance of mine I couldn't dodge. Jack's eyes never left me, his defiance a mirror of my own guilt. Emma's doodles lay open, a soldier under stars, labeled Daddy, and I wanted to reach for her, to tell her I was home. But the lie held me, a chain forged in the desert, and I sat silent, a stranger at my own table. Lila cleared the plates, her movements slow, and I saw the weight she carried, my absence, her grief, a life rebuilt on ruins. I excused myself, fleeing to the porch, the night air sharp in my lungs. Jack followed, his voice sharp. "You're hiding something." I wanted to tear off the cap, to tell him everything, but fear held me. Fear that they'd see the war in me, the man who'd failed them. The letter in my pocket, "Lila, I'm still yours," was a lie I couldn't keep. The house stood silent, its light dim, and I knew the truth was unraveling, thread by thread. The frost glittered under the stars, and I leaned against the railing, Lila's words echoing, "You eat like him." Had she seen me, or was I just a ghost she wanted to believe in? The night was a battlefield, and I was losing ground, a man on the edge of his own life, waiting for the courage to step into the light. Jack's arms stayed locked around me, his sobs shaking us both, and I held him on the porch, the November frost biting through my knees. Lila stood in the doorway, her gasp still echoing. A blade lodged in my chest. The house glowed behind her, its light spilling onto the frost-dusted steps, and the air carried lavender, a fragile thread tying me to the life I'd nearly lost. I shed the beard, the jacket, standing raw. The man I'd been, and the one I'd become laid bare under her gaze. Lila stepped forward, her tears falling, and touched my face, whispering, "Why didn't you tell me?" Her fingers traced my scars, and I flinched, the war's weight heavy in my bones. "I couldn't," I said, my voice rough. "I didn't know if I was still yours." Emma ran to me, her laugh like wind chimes, and I pulled her close, her warmth a flare in the dark. The porch held us, a battlefield where the fight was shifting, the truth a fragile bridge. We sat through the night in the living room, the couch sagging under us, piecing together the years apart. The letters, lost in 23, swallowed by military chaos, lay like ghosts between us. Lila spoke of her grief, thinking I was gone, and I saw the weight she'd carried, her eyes raw with it. Tom, I learned, was a widower who'd helped her through, his own loss a quiet shadow. Guilt clawed at me, but so did gratitude. A man had kept my family whole when I couldn't. Jack stayed close, his defiance softened, his hand gripping mine like he feared I'd vanish. Emma doodled stars on my arm, her voice soft as she asked, "Are you staying, Daddy?" I nodded, my throat tight, but the war wasn't over, just fought on new ground. The nightmares still woke me gasping, the desert's dust still clung to my dreams. And I wondered if I'd ever be the father they deserved. Lila's hand found mine, her touch a promise we'd try. Dawn broke, gray and cold, the house quiet around us. I held my family, their warmth a shield against the frost outside. The letters, the silence, the years, they were wounds we'd carry, but we'd carry them together. Tom's truck rolled by, and I nodded, a silent thanks for the man who'd stood in my place. The living room was a haven, its worn photos a map of the life we'd rebuild step by step. The war within me raged on, guilt, shame, the fear I'd fail them again. But Jack's grip, Emma's laugh, Lila's touch, they were anchors pulling me back to shore. This is my story, I thought, a soldier's fight to reclaim home. If it moves you, if you've ever battled to belong, share your heart in the comments, hit that like, and join us for stories that cut deep. The house stood silent, its light steady, and I knew the fight was worth it. The frost glittered outside, and I looked at Lila, her eyes holding mine, a promise we'd face the war together. The porch swing creaked, a soft echo, and I felt the weight of home. Not a place, but them, my family, my reason to keep fighting. The dawn was a new battlefield, and I was ready, a soldier finding his way back.